Hi everyone, this is Angus R. Dacey, the commentator for Riot City Wrestling here in Adelaide, South Australia, and you're watching CCP Podcasting. And unlike Katie Trey, I am not a Boy Scout, and you are watching the greatest professional wrestling podcast on the internet today.
Friends of CCP Podcasting Productions, welcome to Behind the Bell. John, I did it again. Why am I thinking behind? It's Beyond the Bell. We're back for Beyond the Bell, and of our Behind the Curtain series, I should say. This is going to be a good one. We've had an opportunity to sit down and talk to a lot of pieces of talent across the world. We've Australia, the UK, here in the States. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that we would be able to talk to a gentleman today that has got some serious ties to the industry, and truthfully, his dad is one of my all-time favorites. So when we started talking about maybe branching out and doing a little bit of interview stuff here to see what would happen, I reached out. Like I you don't know unless you ask, and I'm so excited to be able to sit down and talk to this guy today. But before we bring him in, how stoked are you for this one, man?
Oh, this is going to be incredible. I've been looking forward to this for some time now since we talked about having this as an opportunity even. This is a tremendous look for us. And definitely an opportunity to present a platform that I appreciate being out there. You know, we both have had a lot of struggles in our life and a lot of things going on, and I believe that our guest today understands that intrinsically. And while everybody sees the glorious nature of the business, it isn't always spotlighted on, how it affects the people around it and the things that go on, behind the curtain per se. And while we don't generally, harp on the bad things, sometimes we have to look at the tragedy of it all to see the silver lining in the clouds beyond. We have to see the ability to move forward and have inspiration to do so even through the adversities. I think today we're going to explore a little bit of that. We've got a gentleman on today that I'm looking forward to very much hearing his story and getting in touch with, a little bit more behind the curtain, as it were, of what the industry really does to the people around it, and how we can look forward to bettering ourselves and building on what it gives us. So I'm looking forward to it. I know that you are. This is an exciting day for us, and like I said, while it may be a little bit of the darker bits, it's also an inspiration to know that we can move forward into the light. So.
It's not going to be incredible. It's not going to be awesome. Dare I say that this is going to be wonderful. And our guest today, joining us on Beyond the Bell, Travis Orndorff, son of Hall of Famer, WWF, WWE Hall of Famer, Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff. Travis, man, it's good to see you, man. How are you doing today?
Guys, I'm doing well, but I gotta ask, how are you gonna get the intro wrong already?
This is a commonality.
It's a thing. So, and I'll be honest with you. Our platform's behind the curtain.
Age does not discriminate. Am I right?
No, it doesn't. No. That's what happens. You get that can't remember shit thing going on, and that's just a thing. But our platform's behind the curtain, and we literally just changed the name of the show last week to Beyond the Bell. So okay. I'm used to saying this is CCP Podcasting Behind the Curtain. Now it's Beyond the fucking Bell. It's just one of those things. I'll get it.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah,
it makes a little more sense that had been just ingrained in your brain because you said it for so long. So
yeah, I'll give
you a hard pass on that one.
I'll take it.
We've been doing behind the curtain we've been doing behind the curtain for almost a year, almost.
Yeah.
And lots of other platforms have had an opportunity to open up. This new opportunity for us to do the Beyond the Bell series and have people like yourself and talents around the industry do interviews with us is really very new for us, and it's kind of overwhelming still for us to know that it's people like yourself and talents around the world that we've been talking to, and the people that we have slated for future conversations. even are interested in talking to us. But yet every show we do, we seem to have a really good time and we connect well. And that's what we're looking for, is that connection to the other people and the networking across the business. And really, you know, we have a saying on the channel that wrestling brings everyone together, and it really does. For the good or the bad, in general, it does bring people from all walks of life to the middle of the ring. And it gives us an opportunity like we have today to talk to someone like you.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And I'll tell you, if there's, just in retrospect, but also having attended a WWE event recently, wrestling has changed so much. But the irony is, the people that talk about old school wrestling and how great it is, are the same people that bash it now and still watch the product. So it's a very polarizing industry in general, if not because of the road that paved the way for what it is today. Because you have to understand, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, my dad grew up in a trailer park. He wasn't a college educated. He went to college, but a funny story, when he graduated from high school, he walked across the stage, and then they sent everybody to the hotel room, the homeroom, and so the principal brought his diploma. And my dad had married my mom, that year, and he came over and he handed the diploma to my mom and said, "You earned this," so, And then he went on to college, the University of Tampa, and played football in the '70s. And I don't remember him ever telling me a story about a classroom. That was always about what he did on the field. So. From that to being a young father, 21, 22 years old, my grandfather, Ross Maxwell, the first great man in my life, that I really connected with outside my father, was and worked for MetLife in Germany, and then also in Florida. And so my dad worked for him for a short period of time. And on a Saturday morning, my dad and mom were living with my grandparents, and they're watching wrestling, and my dad kind of pointed and goes, "I can do that." And he called. My grandfather was well connected, had a great personality. He reached out, and Dad had a tryout with Hiro Matsuda that Monday. Ironically, my dad was going to get fired from working at MetLife because he was out selling insurance, and that just wasn't him. He could cut a promo, but he had some learning disabilities growing up. He wasn't he was extremely intelligent, but not book smart. That wasn't his thing. And he had used his body for everything, so it made sense that he would transition. But during those days, you didn't know from week to week if you would wrestle the next week. The promoters were very, very cutthroat. They treated the talent just. It's horrific, some of the stories I've heard. So the road that took these guys to be in Madison Square Garden was mostly out of a trailer park in a situation where they had no other choice. Nowadays people go to the power, not the power plant, they'll go to Deep South Wrestling here in Georgia. They'll go to these different places. I think Booker T has one in Texas. So there's these places where anybody from the age of 18 to, I've seen guys in their 40s that go and start getting trained. They're college educated. They have a full-time job as possibly an executive, or they work at a restaurant, depending on what age and what they're doing. It is a completely different avenue to pursue this. Now the promoters haven't changed on the indie circuit. That's still pretty similar, but there's so many of them. There's guys that can fill up a book by traveling through 6 to 15 states, versus back then you went from a territory to a territory and you worked that territory. I lived in 7 states or 6 states before I was 5, and because my dad worked in different territories.
That's a good place to kind of start, because territory wrestling was a pretty big thing back then. And obviously, it's what led us to where we're at today in a profession. And while I do want to pick your brain a little bit about your dad, I also want to make sure that we cover everything about you, because you just said like you were in 7 states before you were like 5 years old. I mean, I can only imagine that right there is tough to deal with as a kid, because you don't necessarily know what's happening from one day to the next. And with the territory system being as cutthroat as it was back in the day, like you're here today and gone tomorrow, and television wasn't what it was at that point. If we're going back to the 70s. So, it's a whole different dynamic, and it's a whole different level. That road's not paved with yellow fucking bricks. Like, you've got to get out there and earn it, and you have to get out there and do it. When you talk about some of the earlier days and the traveling and just the picking up and moving, what was that? I mean, if you can remember back, how was that? How did that affect you?
I don't recall. Here's what I would, let me preface it with this. The experience my older brother had and the experience I had are 2 different worlds. So my brother's 10 years older than me. And, so I was born in Tampa, Florida. Dad was actually born in Winchester, Virginia, and his father was a butcher. And so they moved down to Florida for his work. Dad lived in a trailer park with his dad. His dad had separated or divorced his mom. So his mom and his stepdad lived in the trailer park next to him. His father was a drinker and a smoker. And so, Dad's kind of beginning of before wrestling was he'd go pick him up at the bar and would have bare knuckle fights for money. So that's got to give you a little bit of place. My brother was born when my dad was 18. I was born when my dad was 27. So me traveling from territory to territory, the first memories I have were when we moved to Georgia and we lived in an apartment complex in Riverdale. And so I was 4. My brother would have been 14. And, the memories of being there, they were short, but, you're trying to connect with people. But that was about the time that Dad started to make a decent living. So my brother bounced around from school to school to school till he was, 14 years old. I started school then. And at that point, I was put in a private school, a private Montessori school. And my brother went to a public junior high. I remember we moved to Fayetteville, which was about 5 miles south, and bought a house. My dad, bought his first house, and only house. He lived there until he went to the hospital, and then he moved in with me towards the end, obviously, and I took care of him until he passed. But I can remember my brother being on the bed, and I was really young, and he was just bawling his eyes out because he didn't want to leave the school he was at in Riverdale. And so, he had a very, very rough time going through that lifestyle that I honestly have no memory of. And it unfortunately took him down a different path than I went. He got in a lot of trouble. He started drinking young. He got some DUIs. He ended up getting in some fights and altercations. And my brother's huge, like huge. And he was a heck of an athlete, played baseball, was a pitcher. People had kind of gotten wise to his ability, but he couldn't stay out of trouble. He was struggling in school. I believe he failed a grade, and it was a much different life for him. Eventually, he would be incarcerated. That had a huge impact on me. That was probably the most traumatic thing I experienced, was at a young age, not having any security with the police showing up and us having to go pick him up and different things that happened. And his name is Paul Parlett Orndorff III. My dad's a junior. He's not the first. His dad was the first. And I'll remember to tell you a story about how that had impacted me when I was 16. But I went to a private school, and Dad had grown up. He was 27, not 18. He had his priorities changed. He was no longer scraping for money at bare knuckle fighting. He had a house, and he had laid and paved the way for this career at the time WWF. And he was doing so well at the territory at one point that Vince McMahon Sr. reached out to him and to bring him up to, because people think of it as WWF, but the reality was that was the New York territory, right? So it wasn't. It wasn't what it was even when he left, but that
had become that, yeah.
So that was the big time. And Dad actually turned it down at one point right before he went because he felt like he wasn't ready for it, and so it delayed his entry into the WWF world and the New York territory. From there, my brother stayed in trouble and eventually was out of the house. So it was me, my mom. I stayed in Montessori school. I went to a different private school. Ended up graduating from a private school. And so my life, my experiences, and my brother's, it was we had a different life. His was way much harder. Dad was gone all the time. Dad was diagnosed as bipolar later in life. My mom would tell me very, very often, and almost in a jealous way, and not almost, in a jealous and envious way, your dad talks to you and treats you different than he does everybody. You're the only one he treats like this. So I cannot recall a time in my entire life that we got in a real argument, or even that he raised his voice at me. We had 2 disagreements. And they were volatile because they were a disagreement, but we made up like an hour later, so it wasn't an extended thing. He came to his senses and called and apologized. Like that level of humility was not there when he was 18, 22, 25. That was in his early 50s, or late 40s. So, for me to say I had this horribly rough life, it was more of the drama and trauma around me. And there was a lot of instability because Dad wasn't there and my brother was getting in trouble. My mom having to, try to balance that. And, it was not uncommon for the police to show up. And so it impacted me indirectly. And I saw the volatility between my dad and my brother. Obviously he was trying to manage him in a way. I mean, he wasn't violent. I think my dad spanked me one time in my entire life. I know. And what you have to understand is when he went to New York, the benefit of us living where we did was we were right near Hartsfield International Airport, which is now the busiest airport in the world, I think. But it had Delta and Eastern, so they flew direct. It was direct flights for once. You didn't have to jump around. You could go from Atlanta to California. You could go from Atlanta to New York, Philadelphia. But Dad hit those territories. People saw those TV shows on a Saturday. What they don't realize is they filmed one day and then they wrestled that same match in 6 to 7 different, quote unquote coliseums, which were really just high school gyms in a lot of cases. And so that territory world was always there. But Dad was working constantly. I can recall when he would fly home. Now he called and we talked on the phone, but when Dad would fly home, he might be home on a Friday or Thursday night and then be gone Saturday. So it was very common for him to just take me out of school for that day, and I would spend the entire day with him going to the gym. And there was times he was home for a week, but it was so rare. He caught my baseball games when he was there. I was his priority when he was home, and I was his priority when he was gone because he was doing what he did so he could provide for me. And that sacrifice was never something that bothered me. The only thing that I grew up with outside of my family that my brother had multiple children. My dad and mom actually adopted my brother's children. So I call them my sisters, but they're my three nieces. And that was hard because I went from being an only child to an older brother. And in many ways, because dad was gone, I was a father figure. I did their hair. I helped raise them. I changed schools so they could go to school with me. I took them to and from school. I babysat them. I took them to the movie. Back in the day, there was a Disney movie every week at the movie theater, and I took them every week to the movie theater during the summer. And so again, it was more of the impact of my brother's decisions, dad being gone, my mom dealing with all of it kind of on her own. And at 9, I nearly died. It is what happened. I had gotten what has later been diagnosed as Ehlers-Danlos, but I lost the use of my hand and feet. I just had unbearable neuropathy, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And this is the late 80s, so the science wasn't there yet. And I was like the first case they'd ever seen of juvenile neuropathy, especially it may be one side, but not all 4 limbs. So at 9 years old, I went from 82 to 52 pounds. I had just gotten my black belt in karate. I lost 30 pounds. I was 9 years old. And they had put me in the hospital, and they didn't think I was going to make it. They thought I had a brain tumor. They did all these blood tests. There was no thought of fibromyalgia and different types of neuropathy we know today. And so at that point, I had to learn to walk again. So a lot of the trauma I had was more of my individual medical and kind of the things that happened to me outside that wasn't directly related to the wrestling or what I grew up with, but how my brother grew up and the impact it had. Dad was, when I was in the hospital, my experience with dad in comparison was he would come in, and they were so worked, and my blood pressure was so high, they wouldn't let me drink anything but caffeine. I was getting blood work every day. There was days where they put me on medicine. I would wake up and I couldn't speak. And I would mumbled my words for whatever medicine they had tried me on. And, dad was there every day. There was people praying over me, and he would sleep on a cot in the room with me in the hospital. And at one point they thought I had a brain tumor. And my mom told me later on that she was like, I'm glad that doctor didn't press charges. And I'm like, what did dad do? And I guess he said he had a brain tumor. Dad picked him up and put him against the wall and said, he doesn't have an effing brain tumor, and then put him down. So, my near death experience, if you will, because I was just shriveling up. And I mean, when I was learning to walk again, it would be similar to somebody that had severe damage, because I couldn't take a step because every step I took was so painful that it would drop me. So I think it took me around 6 to 9 months to walk again at a normal pace, and I kept up with my schoolwork. I don't know how. And so when I went back to school, I was so skinny. The nickname they had for me was Eth, because they said I looked like an Ethiopian marathon runner. You could see my heartbeat through my skin and my chest. I was so shriveled up. The kids the school I went to, it was called Woodward Academy, they carried my books from class to class because I couldn't carry them. I was that weak. So growing up around it and the impact it had, there was so many indirect things that happened. The thing that I would say that kind of was the bridge for me was the unconditional love of my father. Like, I had his attention whenever he was able to be present, whether it be on the phone or at home. I would go travel for several weeks with him, during those days when they went from place to place, from Philadelphia to New Jersey to New York. And my mom wasn't with me. It was just me, like a 5-year-old kid. My dad took care of me, and I'd be in the dressing room the entire time. And, different wrestlers would watch me when I was in the dressing room when he'd go out to wrestle. And so I had these weird relationships with adults that, because I would be stuck with them for, a couple weeks at a time. I was blessed. I was blessed to have The child, whether I had the trauma and things I ended up having to deal with later on, and some of the impacts it had on me mentally and physically, I was blessed to have a different lifestyle than what my brother did. And though at the time I didn't understand that, I was pretty frustrated, as you can imagine. But later in life, I did. And the last thing I'll say before we go on is, the only thing that ever, and it's ironic, but the only thing that I ever was resentful of at the time was the wrestling fans, because I wanted my dad's attention when I had the opportunity, and they would interrupt that. And so I would get resentful towards fans. We would go to a restaurant, and my dad, so understand this, my dad loved every fan, and I mean loved and appreciated. We would be there at a restaurant, I'm trying to have a conversation about school, karate, baseball, whatever. And, there'd be a line, and the waitress would come over and go, hey, the kitchen wants to know if they can get an autograph. And my dad would calmly and politely say, let me finish my meal with my family and I'll do it. And then he would go on the tour inside that restaurant, sign all the autographs, and fan after fan after fan, he would sign them. And so as a kid, that was frustrating, only to find out later on that I would fall in love with those same fans. Like it clicked for me mentally and emotionally, and even spiritually. So I'm sure we'll go into it, but but at the time, that was the only frustration I had with my father. Now, I got resentful in my teens because I felt like he wasn't around and I had to handle things I didn't want to deal with. I just wanted to go to high school. But nobody has a perfect life, but him being on the road was absolutely a difficult thing to deal with because of all the things that go on around you.
I can totally see where you're coming from to a degree, because while growing up as a son of a professional wrestler, not only just a professional wrestler, the headline of WrestleMania 1, and you have this older brother, and while you talk about, none of the stuff happened to you per se that was happening with him, but you're having to see it from a child's perception growing up, coming up through, and that in itself is kind of traumatic. Like, it has its own effects on people. It's not something that you can easily get past. And guys, if you're watching on the channel, like, we're having a conversation. We're gonna talk a little bit about Mr. Wonderful, but some things are more important than talking about the wrestler when we're talking to a human, a person who has went through this stuff, as we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. One thing I want to point out, or I want to bring up, is something you had just mentioned. Let's say you're being watched by some of the guys in the back when you're on the road with your dad. I think that would be, as a kid, like, that would kind of be kind of fun and kind of interesting. Like, see Mr. Wonderful, hey boss, can you talking to Andre, can you watch my kid while I go kick Hogan's ass real quick? Can you watch him real quick? Did you have any experiences with some of the guys as when you were traveling with your dad, that maybe any funny stories when you were being watched while your dad's in the ring having 19,000 boo the shit out of him?
So yes, but here's my perspective on it.
Sure.
If you went to work with your dad and you were around his coworkers, you wouldn't see the quality of what they do for their work, right? So when I spent time with Tito Santana or Brian Blair was there when I was born. He was at the hospital. Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant, Big John Studd. All the interactions I had were very much from a human side. And, whether it be Roddy Piper or even, Hulk Hogan, my interactions with them they asked me more about school and life, and I didn't see them wrestle. Yeah. Like, I didn't watch them wrestle because I was in the dressing room the entire time.
You were with the guys in the locker room who were just guys in the locker room, and they were just.
I played cards with them,
right?
I played cards with them and heard the jokes and I said it, there's times that some of the things that I think about, it's like, I don't know how else to say it other than to be a little crude, but like, they're like, what was Big John Studd like? And I'm like, naked and sweaty. That is not an admirable thing to see as a kid. There was nothing about that was warm and fuzzy, like you see him. You saw him coming in his tights.
Yeah, you saw him as a fan. You saw him as a kid in the locker room, just being in the locker room waiting on your dad to get done. That's a whole different perspective, yeah.
I'm seeing you put on different underwear and wearing them inside out because you didn't bring enough for the road and you don't have time to, wash them. And like, it was not the same experience as you might think. It would be no different than hanging out at in the 80s, of course, not now, hanging out at the water cooler. And, Junkyard Dog would spend time with me and taught me how to play cards. And I was really young. And so I would say that the things I liked about those wrestlers, and you have to know, I've also seen them where they didn't know who I was, right? Older, and last year or a couple years ago, we went to StarCast, and so I'm walking up to people my dad wrestled with that I had met in my teens or even the earlier years, and I go up and I'm like, I'm Paul's son, and they're like, oh, okay, they just see me as another fan. And then, depending on, because they're in that mode, they're in their gimmick.
They're dealing with fans, yeah.
They're dealing with it. And then every once in a while, I'm like, I'm Paulson. They're like, okay. And they're like, oh, and they give this like, oh my God, blah, 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 and so but it has to click for them that I'm not there to tell them how great they are.
Yeah.
I'm here because I remember back when we hung out or went to dinner together at, after the matches. And I'll even say this. I remember at Hall of Fame, I was hanging out with Steve Austin, myself, and Dad were at the bar. And, Steve had picked on me a lot when I was 16, in fun, because he had a 3 on the tree Ford truck, and my dad took me out there. He was thinking about buying it. And so they were teaching me how to drive a stick shift, or a manual, out on his land. And I remember I ended up getting this small pickup truck for a couple grand. It was a Nissan hardbody, and Steve called the house and he's like, hey, heard you got a truck, and he's like, I'm going to take that little toy and throw it in the back of my real truck, and we'll take it to the dirt farm where they do the toy trucks, or, I can't remember exactly, but it was, there was a ribbing going on. This was a funny story I was telling the other day. Like, because they ribbed me like I was an adult. Just know that.
Yeah, because that's a locker room. Yeah, if you've never been in a locker room, you have no idea what that's like. But in the locker room, everybody's grown.
It didn't matter that I was 8. It just mattered that I had to handle it. So we were in the car. Dad had a 2-door truck, and it's a bench. And we're next to some girls that I know, and I'm 16 years old, and Steve's next to me, and he just bends down so it looks like I'm just sitting in this bench real close to my dad, and Dad gets their attention. And with his arm around me real close. Yeah. So it looks like we're cuddling, and as a 16-year-old kid, you're like, Dad, stop, and
Steve's egging it on, I'm sure.
And oh, God
just
almighty, yes.
His ass off.
Oh, they just think they're freaking hilarious. When I was a kid, I had so with JYD, I would say he hated being goosed, and so he would watch to make sure you didn't goose him. The guys would do it because they knew he hated it. Of course, as soon as you tell them something they don't like, it's coming. It's on like Donkey Kong, right? And so every once in a while they go goose him, and so I go and pinch him in the butt, and he would literally jump. And I remember thinking that he was faking it. But then I saw somebody else do it, and he wasn't faking it. He hated it. So, of course, they did it as much as possible. But I could hide under the radar because I'm, so small.
You became the perfect, useful tool to them to just dig at it.
Oh, you were a pawn in their rib
Tito
game.
Santana, I don't remember this as well, but I know when I was there with my mom and dad. We had gone to New York, and I think Tito was there at the time. I'm not sure where he lives now. It's been so long. I mean, I've connected to him, just through social media. But I guess as a kid, very young, I tried to give my baby blanket to his firstborn, because he was a baby, and so of course Leah, his wife, gave it back to my mom, and it came home with me, but there was it's one of those memories, like I don't know if I remember it or if somebody told me, and that because I remember bringing it up to my mom and she kind of reiterated it, and I'm like, I don't know if I remember that or if somebody told me that story and that's why I remember it. Steve would pick on me. Rick Rude and Rick Steiner would come over. Dad was really close with Rick. He was they were low key. Dad, they would talk, and you have to understand when I was around Dad and he was home, the F word never came out of his mouth. But when we were with the boys, it was a completely different conversation, right? So I was in my teens.
Locker rooms are definitely no holds barred.
Yep.
Absolutely. It's literally just it's F word with a couple of these in there and some names. And so I wasn't privy to a lot of those conversations as a kid or even in my teens, early 20s. It wasn't till we went to the Hall of Fame that we were sitting outside of our hotel. It was a really nice hotel. And Pat Patterson came out, and he was really nice to me. And Dad was like, and I'm like, at this point we had our own language, right? And so afterwards, I heard the stories about Pat, like, and this is 21 years ago that Dad is like, yeah, so these things happened, or here's the rumor about this. So he wasn't direct knowledge, and quite honestly, like, whether it be any story I've ever heard about wrestling, there could be 10 people there, and those 10 people will have 50 versions.
Have a different story, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, they'll have multiple stories depending on who they're talking to. They fill in the blanks at this place, and it's exaggerated over here, and it's factual over here. And so the truth is somewhere scattered in it. My individual opinion is anything my dad said to me, from my experience, he was never a liar, and except for kayfabe, which, by the way, if you had to ask me what was the most traumatic thing about my life, it was the kayfabe. Because while all these things were going on in my life, they would, hey, what's your brother doing?
Like
I'm
you
like,
could talk to them.
You beat me to it
because there was this barrier.
Oh, I was taught to lie from so young that because kids didn't approach me, adults did. And they would take advantage of. I remember one time this guy promised me a Michael Jordan autograph. And, but he was really just going to get information. He didn't really know Michael Jordan. And I was probably 13 at the time that happened. Different stories like, Rick let me borrow his car when they went hunting. I got to drive around his, nice. He at one point he was trying to sell Dad possibly get a Jaguar. I got to drive that. I got to drive, the GMC 4-door, SUV, which for me was, it was like brand new and had all the bells and whistles. I got to take my girlfriend out in it. So that there were those times. I remember when I had won a karate tournament, and I was right before I got sick. So it was earlier that year. And we went to the Omni, and Dad was wrestling. And when I went in, Bobby Heenan said he was going to play a joke. And he told me he was going to show me a magic trick. And he ended up handcuffing me to a locker. And he's like, all right, you ready? And then they turned off the lights, and they pulled down my gi pants and just sat there and poked me as I screamed my head off. And then they ran out of the room, and my mom comes in, and they let me out of the handcuffs. And Dad's sitting there laughing. Those are when I was 13, we were in Australia for like a month. And so you have to understand, I don't recall, I'm sure my mom went on trips, but I don't recall her ever traveling. And once we had my brother's kids, that wasn't even an option. So I went to the Hall of Fame. I went to Australia. All these places where she could have gone, I went. And I think both her and Dad preferred that because I got to spend, a month with Dad in Australia. But there was this, smoking hot woman named Deborah. I was 13. She was 18. But I wanted to go to the end of the run, end of the wrestling. They threw kind of an after party, and I wanted to go. And so we're in the elevator, and I really do get wrestlers mixed up sometimes because it's been so long. And like there were so many of them, just to be
sure.
honest. Like they run together, and a lot of them had the same gimmick, so it even runs together. But they were like, okay, you can go. And so we get in the elevator, and they stripped me naked and threw my clothes in the lobby. And they're like, if you go walk out in front of 250 people and put those on, you can go to the after party. And of course, I went upstairs and went to my hotel room, and went to sleep because there's no way I was walking out there bare, nude in front of a bunch of people at 13 years old.
I'd have done it.
Here's the thing.
Oh yeah.
2 years later, I would have done it because I'll say this just on a personal side, and this like. When I was a kid, I don't recall a single time with my dad that we wore shirts outside. You weren't like, Dad would have me take off our shoes. He's like, and there was nobody knew about grounding and, electromagnet. He knew it was good for your body. So he never wore shoes unless he had to. Why to this day, my ex-wife called me Florida trash because I wore flip-flops everywhere, even in the winter. And I still do. Like, I'm like, okay, like flip-flops are just what I do. And so it wasn't until and I mean recently. But my dad was watching my baseball games. He would bring a lawn chair, pull up in his pickup truck, throw that lawn chair in the back, and he would sit behind the backstop and watch my baseball games. And it's summer, so he's down to those short shorts, and that's it. And and he's sitting there tanning while he's watching the game, which makes complete sense if you're a wrestler. But when you do that as an adult and you're not a wrestler, and you walk I was walking my dog last summer, and I didn't have a shirt on, and one of my neighbors who I was friends with was like, do you own a shirt? What's and it kind of hit me, oh, not everybody does this. But in fact, I remember one time my youngest was playing soccer, and so we're next to we're at the soccer field, and it's hot. So I got a pair of black shorts on, and I took off my shirt and my shoes and sat there and tanned while I watched the soccer game. And I remember my ex-wife being kind of embarrassed, and my kid looked over, and it looked like I was sitting in the chair completely naked because the shorts blended in with the chair. And one of the kids said, "Is that your dad?" And they went, "Yep, that's my dad. That's what he does." So they kind of knew that's how it was, but it was just different. When you grow up around wrestling, just their mentality, the tanning all the time, constantly thinking about their body.
That's a Florida thing.
I was fixing to say that too. Really, that's a wrestling thing, but it's also a Southern thing because I grew up in Alabama and actually live in Florida and outside of Tampa. So it's funny, and it's even to this day. I played softball for 20 years and would play without a shirt on. But if I go up north and I play softball, I've got a shirt on. That's just a me thing.
I still walk around without shoes as often as possible. I don't like to wear shoes. I wear them to go to work or the store, and that's about it.
Well, that makes sense.
It could. I can tell you that walking around Atlanta, people I'm now more aware of that's not the norm everywhere I go. I think I took it off in places you probably we were next to our church. This was like a church soccer league, so maybe that was the inappropriate part. But to this day, I probably wouldn't really genuinely care.
Sun's out, guns out, bro. Sun's out, guns out. That's where I'm at with it.
Going back to some of the wrestlers, I talked to him on the phone. It wasn't, in fact, I talked to Paul White recently. It's been a while, probably a couple years ago, but I remember walking through these are the things that kind of happened with wrestlers, but maybe not, kind of indirect. I walked into the kitchen and I saw his Paul Bunyan gimmick on a picture. So I saw him when he was independent, had never, and I looked at him like, Dad, and Dad looked at me, he's like, he's a freak, he's going to make it. And that was it, and then, he turns into the Giant and all the things that came and the accolades and, his amazing career. He's a great human being. But my experience with him is I saw his, promo shot. And then I would, there would be the phone calls and the different things. And, Chuck Palumbo coming over to the house to fix my dad's car. He had gotten this Land Cruiser. So my interactions with him were all so human, and in many ways they were. Dad was kind of a mentor, so I don't want to say I looked down on them. I just saw them on a different level.
Sure. And pieces, two things that I want to circle around on, because that you kind of touched on it a second ago, and that was about kayfabe. Growing up, for you specifically, maybe not, and I would imagine it was harder for your brother, considering the time frames that were different. But the kayfabe issue is something I do want to kind of talk about, because I don't think people truly understand what that's like. Like I mean, from my perspective, I have no idea. I can only imagine. And I know that you said that you were taught to really have to lie, essentially. And with your dad's career being as extensive as it was, and I would imagine that, like, into the mid 90s and into the later 90s, when he was at WCW and had the power plant stuff going on, he was training all these different guys. So the second piece of it is when he's kind of transitioned out of ring, are you still having to play the kayfabe game? I think kayfabe kind of disappears in the late 90s, 96, 97 ish.
2000s, yeah.
But how difficult, and what were some of the things? I say this because I can only imagine. I know how hated Paul Orndorff was by the fans. He was playing a bad guy, especially in his WWF run, even into his WCW run. But really, like the 80s and into the early 90s, dude was despised. And I can only imagine, as a kid, somebody coming up to me and saying, "Who's your dad?" And if you get into it, and like, I can see fights breaking out ultimately, because, as a kid, we're not smart, and we think everything's real. So what kind of situations like that did you have to navigate from your perspective? And if you didn't, then that's fine. We can slide into the next question.
No, I absolutely did. So I'll tell you a story about my brother and why I think it was so difficult for him. And it was difficult for me because of when you're taught, because you can call it kayfabe, we were taught to lie.
Yes.
And we were taught to maybe not exaggerate, but certainly embellish.
Yeah, you had to
the
act.
situation.
You were playing a character 24 hours a day.
I've said this. I created two identities. There was Travis, and then there was Mr. Wonderful Son. And I didn't know that's what I did, but there was a time and it perpetuated through my life that it started there, but it didn't stop. Like, I didn't know how to turn it off. But when I walked into a room, I became a performer versus, now with the hindsight and therapy and everything else, I walk into a room thinking, how can I be of service to these people? The difference for me, and I'll share my brother's story, is here's what was unique about my dad. And this is just my personal opinion. If you are Davy Boy Smith's daughter and son, if you are the Steiner's kids, because that's not their real last name.
Yeah, sure.
My last name was Orndorff. Nobody in America knew another one. And
because who would, right?
Yep.
So I couldn't escape it. And I remember at a very early age, going to the doctor, checking in a restaurant, and people would hear Orndorff, and the first thing would be, "Are you related to?" And so it got to the point where people would say Orndorff, and I'm like, yes, he's my father. What happened is, as I got older, and I would say early 20s, late teens, but probably early 20s, I was still doing that, and it depended on the environment that it made sense to people because they watched it. But in a lot of cases, they were like, okay. And the thing was, I didn't stop thinking that I had to perform. I didn't stop thinking I didn't have to go, yes, that's my dad. Because people would say Orndorff, and at one point they just wanted to know how to pronounce it. They weren't even thinking about wrestling or associating it. Now, my brother, when he was in high school, because I don't remember ever feeling like we were rich, right? But I was 9-10 years old when he quit wrestling and we bought the bowling center. But my brother was getting my dad's Toyota Celica, and my brother was so mad because he wanted, you know, it was he wanted an IROC, and you know, like my dad could afford it, but he didn't trust my brother, and
it was
you know,
the point of the matter.
Right, but my brother had to put on that persona at school. And so he had to live up to, because that is the height of Dad's fame, is his 10th, 11th grade years. And there was an expectation for him to appear and have that. And that you have to understand, what happens is it happens to you so often, you feel the pressure of it being your identity. You feel the pressure of having to live up to being Mr. Wonderful's kid, who was larger than life. I mean, his body alone would intimidate anybody in any situation. I mean, you're talking his body was, you know, less than 0.5% of people that have ever lived look like my dad. And so there's
your dad was absolutely jacked.
Right. So living up to that, like as a kid, I didn't realize I fell into it because kids didn't put me under that amount of pressure. Again, it was the adults saying, "Are you going to grow up and be your dad? Are you going to grow up and be a wrestler?" And you know, I don't think it was anybody's ill intent, but I certainly felt like I had to live up to that in every environment. And then when I would get around people and people find out who he was, of course they wanted to know who this wrestler was and who this wrestler was. Well, I knew that I wasn't allowed to tell the truth. So I just give a different version, you know, which was kayfabe. And, you know, I would talk to Dad about it and there would be approval behind it because we were keeping up the image. And so like when my brother got in trouble, I remember one time, you know, he was away and you know, people would say, "Hey, what's going on with your brother?" And the comment was, we'd say, "Oh, he works for the state." And, you know, that was, so even in just common life family situations where you think everybody knew because it was in the paper and, you know, we went to a big church and it wasn't like we could really hide, we still kept up that image. And not just in Georgia, like across the country, it would, you know, people would have these you know, relationships. Dad did not spend a lot of time with his family, so that those things were shut down. They weren't discussed. My dad's childhood, like I heard those traumatic stories later on, but those are things that weren't discussed. And I, you know, parents were that way, boomers were that way anyway, but you take it to a upteenth number of levels. But I can remember as a kid and all through my life, people coming over and asking me a question and hearing kayfabe, and that meant shut the F up, Travis. Like, don't say a word. And it meant come up, you know, like that was an immediate stop. The problem
is definitely something that the newer generations do not understand or deal with, because kayfabe is not anywhere near what it was during your dad's career, or even the bit that we were involved in the business. Like, kayfabe was still around and still active, you know, into the early 2000s. But anything in the last 20 years has really not been dictated by that level of kayfabe. And I think it's definitely changed what the industry's doing for sure.
The irony of kayfabe is, I think it exists, but it only exists in Hollywood now. Like, the perception you have of reality stars and how they have to live, and the Instagram, and how they, you know, you see these people and they look ripped year round, and it turns out they just take a ton of pictures in 3 days.
Now we have kayfabe on social media, and that's about it. It's everybody portraying this image of things, and not. I think kayfabe has moved into our real lives, and not necessarily like the way it used to be.
Yeah, it's on dating sites if you want to go down that road. I mean, you know, it's on the filters, it's on the AI. There is a desire to not be you, and you want everybody else. And the hope is, this is where I that's why I'm so distant from it, and I don't fall into it now. Your hope is that people don't find out the truth, because then you have to deal with that, and you have to expose yourself as being dishonest. But at that point, you do that and you get used to the approval from it, and that's the thing that catches you, is that by portraying, like, I remember in 9th grade, we were not doing well financially. Dad was transitioning. I remember, I think it was 93. It was between UWF back to WCW. And I remember getting picked on one time because I wore the same shirt in the same 5 days, like Monday through. So I wore it twice in a week. And somebody pointed it out, but I didn't have another shirt, and Mom didn't have money to go get one. And don't misunderstand me. There was times where we did well. There was times when that's
broke. The up and down of the industry.
Yep.
Yeah, like that comes with territory. I think, man, John, I've got so many things that's on my mind that I need to process. John, I'm gonna throw it over to you for a second. What do you got?
I think really one of the things that you brought up earlier kind of struck out to me when you were talking about the way that the difference between your brother's experience and your experience, even though it was only 10 years apart, even 5 years of my brothers and I are only a couple of years apart, and our experiences were very different. Just growing up in our own house, and how the rules affected everybody in the house kind of differently depending on who you were and where you were at. And when I graduated, things were different, and because I was the older one, and my younger brothers had different rules in the house than I did. So it's interesting to hear you also say that, how things were vastly different between you and your brother, and yet still the effects that your brother were dealing with, and the things that the way that your dad's life affected him still trickled into your life because you were at home dealing with the things that were happening with your brother. And still, you felt like your dad was still there paying attention to you. And while it was a struggle to try and get the attention from the fans too, the fact that he took so much time and effort to make sure that you felt like you were a priority is a testament to your father's work ethic and still trying to keep that balance and home life together. Even if it wasn't across the board, with you at least, you felt like you were a priority. And I wonder, as you were growing up in the business and into your teens, did you see a shift in the desire of the company to balance out their rosters, home and work life? Or was that still a struggle all the way through then? Because I know that for a long time, wrestlers were not looked at like
humans.
Realistically,
yes.
they were paid performers, and they were expected to do a lot of things. And in the era that your dad was coming up in the business, that was still very, very prevalent. And promoters pretty much got to do whatever they wanted and push the agenda. And now we're seeing more of a resurgence of like them being treated like people. They're not just roster spots or paychecks that you're paying. They're people that are working under your banner. And did you see the beginnings of that system kind of foster in? Or was that still after your involvement, after your dad was kind of out of the business altogether?
I remember a story in the early 90s where Dad, and he basically had asked for time off, and they weren't going to give it to him, and he had the option for UWF. So he basically quit because he wanted to go on a hunting trip. So in the early 90s, no, not at all. I would say the beginning of that did not happen in New York. And this, I think the people, so first of all, the things that are happening today, in my opinion, just my opinion, is that people like Triple H and Tony Khan understand the culture. Like it's like why Bill Belichick's not at the New England Patriots anymore. He didn't adapt to today's football and the culture he built around him. The things that happened during the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s, like that is starting to come up, and it's going to bury multiple people because of and this stuff happened way back when.
We're seeing that ripple come across.
Why do you think my dad never wanted me a part of wrestling? Because that stuff was kayfabe, and even if you knew, you didn't know because you weren't there, but you heard enough. But back then, you couldn't go report it. Nobody would do anything. It's I would say, in the beginning of it was Eric Bischoff at WCW, because that was when individuals started getting contracts multi-year. That is the first memory I have of multi-year contracts was guys coming to WCW, and and they were decent, like $1 million contracts. And so there was a sense of security with that contract. There were things written into that contract.
Riders,
whether you like Eric Bischoff or not, like the times I was around him, and I interviewed his son on my podcast, Some Kind of Wonderful. It's on our dad's YouTube page, but
we'll get into that in a minute.
And Garrett and Eric both. My dad took Garrett and Eric hunting. Like he didn't go hunt with Vince. You know what I'm saying? Like he went hunting with Eric and Eric's son. And so to me, I remember being a little bit older, and I was in college, and I went to Huntsville, Alabama, and I brought somebody with me that wanted to go because I didn't care, but I knew my dad'd be there because he was a agent at the time. I was like, yeah, I'll go see my dad. It's an hour and a half away. And I remember going up, and there was like a really nice like buffet where people were hanging out and talking, and I'm like, what has happened here? Because it used to be locker room closed. These guys are in here. Everybody, it wasn't. I got to meet Karl Malone. Like I got to meet. Oh God, I can't believe his name. Let's Get Ready to Rumble.
Michael Buffer.
Michael Buffer. Got to meet him. One time, funny stories about wrestlers. So I was in St. Pete, Florida with my dad. And it was great when it was local because we could just drive it, and Dad didn't mind driving. So I got to go a lot of places in Florida and Atlanta with him, or, for 4, 5, 6 days at a time that really didn't interrupt life, especially during the summer. And so I'm sitting there, and I was a huge fan of Saved by the Bell, right? This is obviously at a point in time when I had hair, and I've not had hair longer than I had it now. But
man, bald's beautiful, bro. Bald is beautiful.
Dude, I'll be honest with you. If I had to grow out hair, I would still shave it because it's so convenient and it's so nice. But we were down in St. Pete, and Stevie Ray from the Harlem Heat like bolts towards me, and I'm like, oh my God, what's about to happen here? And he thought I was Jeff Gordon. Here's the best part. So I hadn't talked to him in 30 years, and because we sat there and talked for a while, he's like, "God, man, you look," and he had his NASCAR jacket on and everything. I'm like, he is marking out right now about just thinking I'm Jeff Gordon.
It's funny to see this massive international superstar just fangirling.
I knew him, but I had my back turned, and I kind of looked like him in high school. I'm not gonna lie. Like I can see where the confusion came from. But anyway, so I'm on Facebook, and I don't post a bunch of stuff. I've got things I'm dealing with, and that's not just my priority in life. But I messaged him. We connected, and we're friends. And I said, "Do you remember down in St. Pete, like chasing me down to meet Jeff Gordon?" He said. His response was, "Of course I do. In fact, when your father passed, God rest his soul, my first thought was, I wonder if his son still looks like Jeff Gordon."
Man.
That was a memory that it would, that affected the both of us.
It stuck with you both. Yeah, that's something that's really cool. The being in and around wrestling, unless you're there, and neither John or myself are anywhere near where you were with the business and outside of the business. I do want to pivot a little bit and get into, you just mentioned Some Kind of Wonderful, which is one of your projects over on your YouTube channel. Links and all that stuff are down below, guys, in the video description. And if you'd be so generous and so kind, just go over and give it a free click and give it a subscribe. We'd appreciate that too. And the other pieces of the projects that you've got going on, which I think, for you, for me as a fan, like let me talk as a fan first, to see the daily post on Twitter and Instagram, whether it's a promo or whether it's a match or whether it's there's something that's being put out there that help keeps your dad's memory alive for guys like me who appreciated what he did when he was inside that ring, and understand the sacrifices that were made in order to entertain me, and it's just for when I came across it. Obviously, I think I've been following the page for probably a year now, give or take. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a modern reminder to me of how good things were as a fan back in the day, and it's one of those situations to where I cruise over and I checked out the page, and I saw where you had just started the Some Kind of Wonderful podcast, and there's several episodes that are out there. What made you want to kind of dabble in the podcasting sphere? Did you have any kind of inspiration behind it, and how was that looking for you? Was that
really like the sound of my voice? Does that count?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yes, it does. That's one of the things I like about it for sure.
I identify as neurodivergent, so like I can be completely quiet. I read a post one time, and it truly defines me. Is like hanging out with me is like microdosing Wikipedia. So we'll start. Let's start with the beginning of this. So I had not been on social media other than maybe a year or two when I was like 30, until I started dating somebody, and she was like, "You should get a social media page so you can see these things." And I was like, "Okay," because I was dating her and I would do it, and never expecting that would turn into anything. That was the last thing on my mind. In fact, so to go back, Dad would tell me when I remember like it was yesterday. He'd taken me. I was a freshman in high school, and I was going to Landmark Christian, and I was on the varsity baseball team, and I started. So he made almost all those baseball games, I was pretty good. Like I think I batted 600 that year, and I was starting as a catcher.
Not bad.
I didn't have an arm to throw anybody down, but I was great defensively. And then, but I was really small, so there's no way I could have done anything more than what I did. It was just good timing. But we were driving down the road, Highway 29, and he said, "Son, one day you're going to tell my story." And I was like, "No, I'm not." Because number one, we never talked about any of that stuff. And I go, "Dad, if I tell your story, like I got to tell everything. Are you sure that's okay?" And he's like, "Just you'll know when it's the right time, and don't embarrass anybody." And so when he got older and his mind started to go, he would be like, "Travis, can we do anything? Can you get anything going?" And I had a wife and a career, and I was raising 2 kids, and I was struggling with the injuries I had, and being paralyzed for several years in my right arm, and then when he not my favorite moment, but obviously you can look back on things and think you would have done it different. So I at the time just had my personal social media, and when I went into the hospital and saw Dad in that condition, I freaked out. And so understand at that point I'm still recovering from injuries, and there's a lot of stuff going on, but I didn't have the perspective or the peace that I have now. So I wasn't drinking at the time. I had quit for several years, but I started drinking after I saw him like that. That was when I started back for the first time in a long time. And I got that video of him because after I investigated the situation and how many times the hospital had called to try to get him home, and like he had just been left there, but it was during COVID, so I called and they wouldn't let me talk to him, and there was a lot of things surrounding it. And when I saw that, because I had talked to Brian Blair, and Brian was like, trying to help. We had called Adult Protection Services like every year for several years, myself, and then Brian did it once, and that wasn't doing anything. I remember talking to the lady and interviewing, and I'm like, when are you going out? She's like, as soon as they'll allow me, because of COVID rules. So there was this period during COVID where the abuse, the physical abuse, the verbal abuse, it had taken to a point, but he was out of the house bouncing from hospital to hospital as he deteriorated so fast. And so keeping up with that during COVID, also having COVID, still dealing with, I gotten divorced and struggling with those emotions. So I wasn't in a great place. I had a great career, but just emotionally, spiritually, it was hard. And so that was like kind of I had the social media just then, and so when I see that, I freak out, and I'm like, if Adult Protection Services won't help, Grady Memorial Hospital won't help, I'm posting this and making sure as many people see what you left him in. And it was a coincidence because I'd only had social media for maybe 5 months at that point, and I remember getting phone calls from people and take it down, and I go, no, like, I will do whatever I have to do at this point to get him home. They won't give him to me, and I'm going to get the news involved, which things happen very quickly.
It's amazing how fast social media influence can get gears moving.
I know how to handle it differently now, and I'm in a different place spiritually and mentally and physically, and so I would have known how to navigate it. I didn't. I had been on for 5 months. I didn't know how to navigate it, nor did I anticipate, or even think about what other people were thinking. All I cared about is I wanted my daddy, and I had asked for him to come move in with me multiple times, and I even brought him to the house after one time that he was abused, and he wouldn't stay, and I couldn't get anybody else to do anything. There was at one point somebody overdosed inside my parents' house. All the while my dad is there, right? And not really knowing what's going on. So when that happened and I saw, what the situation was, and they were like, you got 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay. And I filmed and I left and I posted it. And then boom, Dave Metzler. I've never met. Is that how you say his name?
Metzler.
Like
Dave
reporter.
Meltzer.
Yeah, I never saw it, but allegedly he was like, oh, I talked to Paul, he would never want this, and please don't share this video, and people thought, even to that point, it's like, oh, we're keeping kayfabe alive, and I was like, listen, that is my daddy. Like, I do not care if y'all don't like it. Look at what's like, why are you not more concerned about what's happening? And going, Travis, what can we do? And if Travis, if we can do that, will you take, like, I would have taken the video down if somebody had said, hey, we'll help you. But the only response I got was, why did you do that? Your dad would be embarrassed. And I'm like, we'll see how this ends. So from that video, there was a woman in Norcross that was like, I'll take him without any money. So they ended up getting in touch with my mom, who was responsible for all this, and she agrees. So we get him there. I go up there and visit him, go take him, get a haircut, clean up his face. My youngest oldest sister, Brandy, because my parents adopted him. I don't think they adopted him, but they had custody of him. So she's my sister for all intents and purposes. She came up and saw him, and we did things with him. And then I arranged with the lady. I'm like, hey, how do I get him home? And she goes, I'll call you in 2 days. Like, she wasn't supposed to do this, just so you know. Like, my mom signed papers. I was supposed to be the number one person on the call list. I wasn't even on the call list. Magically, after I was like, hey, put me on the call list. Yeah. And so I wasn't even on there, which the lady was like, hey, you're not on the call list. I'm like, what? Didn't you hear her say in front of me she was going to do that? So everybody was in on it at this point, right? And so she ended up going and taking him to the hospital on Sunday to have him checked. Talked to the counselor there, and they were like, you need to have Travis bring him to the hospital, then we can release him to him. And so that's what happened. I got him to the hospital. He was released. I took him to the hospital. They told me the situation. I called hospice. He came home with me and stayed with me until his last breath. But I know that's not where we were where we started, what we were talking about.
Well, first of all,
I say all that to say, number one, that video, as far as I know, we've talked to everybody online, and the last place we saw it, it happens to be a former wrestler, and I reached out and said, hey, can you take that down? He's like, done. And so that video should be gone, it was never my intent what happened with it. I didn't even think about it, just to be honest. I just wanted my dad. Moving into when he passed, and I announced his passing, and this should transition us into this thought. When he passed, that's when I saw the fans the way he did. I'll get emotional. Give me a second.
You're fine.
I'm kind
You're
of getting
fine.
there myself, just
I am
talking
too.
about it, boss. You're good.
So at that point, people started to respond, and they knew, one, that he was with me, and he had been, like when the hospice came in, they gave him a few days to live. And I remember saying, you don't know him. You don't know what he's like. I said, I think they said 3 days, and I was like, he'll live 11. I said, he'll live between 10 and 14. They were like, that's impossible. I was like, watch. He died on day 11, just so you know. And she came in, she's like, this is unbelievable. I'm like, I told you. I'm like, you shouldn't have said it in front of him, and he probably would have passed the 3, but he probably overheard you and was like,
but nope.
Nope, you don't know my dad. But we announced it, and so we, the world finds out that he passes, and there was a mixed review of, many people thought I was embarrassed him. So I caught it was things. I was so upset about his passing that was the least of my concerns. Like, my daddy died, so like, you don't like it. I delivered the morphine for 10 days. How do you think I feel? Like, his brain had stopped. If he drank anything, he would asphyxiate. So, we announced that, and I end up meeting a guy named Tyler Elenick. He is the mastermind behind all of these pages. He does the post. He finds the videos. He's got a passion for it. I consider him my brother now. And he reached out and was like, hey, do you want to do a page? So I took my personal page and just converted it into my dad's page and deleted all the 6 things I posted, or 3 things I posted of myself. And it was like his words were coming true. I was going to tell his story. So when I talked to Tyler, I'm like, listen, the deal is, I'm not celebrating him as a wrestler. Like, we can put that out there, but this is a love letter to my father.
Take all the time you need.
And
Definitely.
so I needed y'all to see him through my eyes. The guy that was so proud of me and would tell me every day. Like, we talked on the phone almost every day till it got to the point where he would call and we would talk, and he wouldn't remember 15 minutes later. Or even 5 minutes later, and it would be like 26 phone calls in a row. And I'm like, Dad, I can't. Like, I would schedule a time to talk to him at 7 p.m. And, depending on where he was at mentally, he couldn't talk at that time. But that was a love letter to my dad. And I knew people loved him as a wrestler, but I'm like, man, you don't see how he raised, his grandkids. You don't know how close and how much time he spent with my nephew Chandler, taking him hunting. Like, all you see was this Greek god of a man, and I got to see the guy that would tear up when something traumatic happened. I got to see the guy that when he was hanging out with he would literally stop everything and go over and say thank you for your service to a veteran. And when he went to the military signings, he would stay there well after what they paid him, and he would sign every single one. I was there when he was at the Special Olympics, and he was the celebrity for the Special Olympics. And I remember him telling me at a very early age, if you ever make fun of somebody with a disability, just know you're going to get an ass whooping. And I remember somebody said something derogatory once, and I know for a fact they never said it again. And it was one of my friends who was at the house and said something, and my dad got pissed. And my dad never even talked to me like that. He got pissed, and he pulled my friend aside and was like, "Let me tell you something." And in fact, even in high school, he would beat up bullies that would pick on anybody with special needs. So he was so tender-hearted, diagnosed bipolar. Throw in the drugs, and he wasn't a drinker, but he did some drugs, and the steroids, and the environment, and his age, and the celebrity, and the money, and all that stuff. Like, there was a tumultuous time in his life, there's no question, but he became a Christian when he was, I think, 36 years old. So that would have put me at 8. So when I tell you I had a different version of my father, it was a different world. That love note to my dad became our social media pages. And I didn't expect a reaction. It was my way of healing. I was sharing so I could heal. What happened was, people go back to their normal life. Just the way life is, people go back to, school and work, and people that you talk to in your family that you didn't talk to before, you don't talk to them anymore. But it was the fans that would reach out to me and check in on me. It was them that showed, an appreciation, not just for his work, but for who I could express as my father. And they appreciated when I peeled back that layer to this human being of full of love, full of tenderness, a side of Mr. Wonderful that you just wouldn't know. And people all the time would say he's an amazing wrestler. I'm like, he was a better father. He wasn't perfect. But if your child knows that you're unconditionally loved, that's meaningful. That's something that stays with you no matter what. And it's something that I've extended to my own children. There's nothing they could do that I would ever. I don't even know that I've ever yelled at him. My son actually is like, "No, you did it once," and I'm like, "Jesus, you keep bringing that up." So Tyler Elenick does the post, started the videos, and so the next step in the healing was like, what was it like for other wrestlers' kids? So we started this podcast, Some Kind of Wonderful, so I could talk to other wrestlers' kids and talk about like what we're talking about here. And I can ask questions they can identify with and things that other people wouldn't know. So we had Garrett Bischoff on. He talked about going hunting with my dad. We had Roddy Piper's daughter, Fallon. We had Bronwyn Billington out of Dynamite Kid's daughter. At that point, I started to have some of my health issues that I didn't know I had. I knew I was in pain, but I didn't realize the extent. So I had to I was still struggling emotionally. I was depressed. I was crying all the time. I couldn't keep it together. His 1 year anniversary, I cried of his passing. I cried for 3 days straight. I left work. I'm like, I can't do this. I cannot stop crying. I was on a business trip and I just started bawling my eyes out after a dinner, and I could not stop. It was uncontrollable, depression at that point. But these pages, to me, one of the things that we tried to accomplish was the changes that were happening in me after his passing. And I didn't mean for it to evolve that way. It was very natural because his passing was, as odd as it sounds, death is inevitable. But the life that I got to have, not only as his son, but then I figured out later in life, I don't have any of these opportunities if it's not for these fans. I wouldn't have gone to the private schools. I wouldn't have my kids. Yeah, we had some rough years, but every single thing that led up to my life and the level of education, the vacations, the vehicles, like I can just keep naming things. All of that was possible because of the fans. And as I'm interacting with them and they see this humanity of my dad, they became more human as well for myself. And I think, and vice versa, instead of being Mr. Wonderful Son, I became Travis. And there was this element where I was very vulnerable, very exposed. Those pages are my heart on a platter. In fact, there were times I had to take a break because it was just too much on me emotionally. So I've always done the replies. Tyler will jump in every once in a while, but I've always done the comments, or people have questions, I do the replies, and that's across all the platforms. But what I also do is I monitor it. My family and anybody that's been on our pages, we don't say anything negative about anybody, and that's on purpose. And if you say something negative, I delete it. I don't tell you I delete it. I don't block you. I'll block you if you do it enough times and you get crude. But I don't want anybody to absorb anything negative, because that's not what my dad was about. Even if he had some of it, that's not what he would have wanted, and that's not who I am. I'm not here to be vengeful or vindictive or resentful. It leads me into how this has grown, and these opportunities inside that world. When Dad's name got mentioned at the by Triple H at the conference for WrestleMania, somebody sent me the clip that morning because I don't watch it, and I was like, cool, they mentioned my dad. That's something I haven't heard in a long time because, I have my own reasons for believing that he's not part of that world now, which is okay. It's okay. If God wills it, it'll happen. If it doesn't, his legacy's secure.
We're jumping on the bandwagon to get Mr. Wonderful attached to the 2K video game progress. That thing needs to happen. The fact that it hasn't is beyond me. And
I think I have my own perception. There were some things that happened with Vince, even when he left wrestling, but also with the lawsuit about CTE. I think that left a bad taste in everybody's mouth because of those, and they didn't renew his Legends contract, which it's at their discretion. They got to look at that the way they do, and I have no control over that whatsoever.
Yep, no.
So if it happens, great. I don't play video games, so if it happens, great. So going back, what we have accomplished in building these out, we're coming back and doing some of this, some kind of wonderful, because I'm in a different place, and there's part of me that is capable of being that vulnerable and open, because I can't do kayfabe no more. I don't have it in me. It's gone. It's been deleted.
Yep.
And so I've got to be aware of what I can handle before I jump into it. But all the things that happen, even my family will say, Travis, I love seeing Dad's site. It's always uplifting and positive, and that's something we cultivated.
You have done a great job of doing that.
Well, Tyler and I have had conversations, and I had to, for lack of better words, even though I was coming to that place. That was part of my growth as an individual after Dad passed. I'm a different human being than I was when he passed. Completely different. And I continue to grow spiritually from that experience. That's why I say it's the last gift he gave me of passing was my identity back. I could just be Travis, and I could be Mr. Wonderful Son in a completely different way, the real version. I could really tell the stories about why these things happened and what happened. I didn't have to carry that burden anymore. So in many ways, it's never good that your father's passed, but where he was mentally and physically, I had no control over it. But he gave me permission to tell his story 30 years before. And so I didn't understand how it would work out. And when he passed, I didn't think that was going to happen. It just happened. And now I'm doing exactly what he said. And I'm doing it in a way that I think I'm not worried about whether he's proud of it. I know he would be. I'm proud of it. Mm-hmm. But I'll say this. The clip that I ended up using, we posted every board, and I was genuinely grateful. It made my morning. I went about the rest of my day. It's not like I live in this stuff, but it made my morning as I watched that. I was like, that is really cool. Then I had my coffee and left and did what I do. I posted it, and I put in there, it's been a long time since I've heard him. Thank you, Triple H. That warmed my heart, made my day. And I left it at that. Well, on Twitter, it got a lot of views, 300,000 views. and that, which means nothing to me, by the way. I literally didn't like. I was like, that's a cool story. Move on. Like, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't get my heart rate up or anything like that. I'm much more interested in the things I do now than I'll ever be worried about those things. I mean, if you like it, great. What I did love is that gratitude was trending on Twitter or X. That a comment saying thank you got that many views, because that is my heart. I'm genuinely grateful. And if people got to see that and see that connected to my father, then you understand how he raised me. What he wanted me to be. I wasn't what he wanted to be for a long time, for a good 15 to 20 years. I went down a pretty rough path. But it didn't bother me. Unconditionally loved me anyway. But that is the culmination for me of people understanding where I'm at and how grateful I am to have had this world that is so unique. But the podcast, the YouTube page, the Facebook, I just because I get bored sometimes in the morning, I'm up really early. I started putting some of his promo quotes on Threads. It's still one of my favorite ones, but he took off his shirt on one of the, I can't remember what it was called, the Titan, like where they sat at the desk, the Johnny Carson looking scene, and he had on like dress pants and a dress shirt, and he rips off the dress shirt and he's like, with a body like this and a face like this, you can do any damn thing you want to do and I get away with it. And so I posted that on Threads. It's literally just stuff that made me laugh, that came out of his mouth, that half the time didn't make any sense, but people still loved it and didn't pay attention. But yeah, all those things there. The podcast, I've reached out to a couple people. One of my dad's friends' sons has agreed to come on, and I can't tell you we're going to do 50 episodes or it's going to run forever. I don't think that far ahead. It's one day at a time, and it's going to have to be a conversation I want to have. There's some wrestlers kids that, quite honestly, I've seen what they talk about. I don't want to have that conversation, and that's not just any disrespect. That's just not where I'm at. I want to know how you can make the world better in some capacity, and I need to know that you're not still kayfabing. Like, I'm not going to give you money for you to be honest. And not only one person I've reached out to ever asked for money, and I just kind of chuckled because I'm like, why do you think you're that interesting? I'm still baffled people want to interview me.
You have a perspective that's unique and interesting, and you have a valid story to tell, and it's the whole reason we wanted to put you on our show, is to give you a place to talk about the way that the industry affected you and the way that you grew up and the things that you deal with on a day-to-day because of where the industry put you in your life. And it's interesting, and the outreach that you've gotten from the fans is exactly what I would have expected, because you're giving like you said, you lift the curtain a little bit on what it was like to be around the man that was Paul Orndorff, not the kayfabe wrestler that was Paul Orndorff. And those of us out here that are true fans of your dad's work and really did love what he gave to the industry, we love to look past that curtain and see the person that we admire be also earning our respect, because that's what you're showing, is how respectable he was and what kind of an honorable person he was, and the real nature behind the curtain. And that gives us more hope, because not only do we appreciate his body of work and the talent that he had, but now we can actually truly appreciate the person and respect Paul as a person, not just the character that he played, but to see all of the influence that he put in behind the curtain too. And that's why people want to talk to you. That's why we want to talk to you. That's why your story is valid and important.
And I'm grateful. Like, the message I want to send is love, tolerance, respect. Like, we've got to get past, arguing with people over everything. I saw a quote the other day. It said, it used to be when you had a personal diary, you didn't want anybody to read it. Now everybody posts it online and gets mad when you don't. And, for me, if I can be part of you take this man that was a bad guy and all these things and these promos where he digged into people, and you understand that he was so loving. He was so loving. Like, I don't remember what age he stopped, but it was in my early 20s that he'd still be like, come sit on my lap real quick and cuddle with me, and just give him a big hug. Now, part of that was because his knees hurt, but he was just that kind of guy. And it's relevant to me that people understand that, because the way he influenced so many people, I want you to understand this is who he really was, and I want you to have that part of the influence that I got that maybe you didn't see. But I get tons of stories from fans of like one time, I use this one as an example because it's so fresh in my memory, because I remember it so plainly and I needed it that day. It was a guy, he's in his 50s now, and was 16 years old, and he went up to my dad after a match in New York, and him and his buddy, and said, hey, can we get your autograph? And he's like, no, but I'll take you to eat. So they went down to a pizza place, and he bought him pizza, and he sat there with them. He told them to respect their parents, and he gave them a workout routine, and he sat there and like talked to them as human beings. Like 16 years old, they're like,
not to give an autograph, but it didn't stop him from sharing his time.
And of course, he gave him an autograph. It was just, and I got other stories where he would spend time with people, and he would. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Jerry Jarrett, but I could be wrong. He was with somebody, and it was in a town. He was by himself, and he went to go spend time with someone's kids and show them stuff. Because he wanted to, not because it was asked. Like, they had asked, and he was like, I want to do it. You're not inconvenienced. I want to do that. And there would be time he would be with people, and they would come back to me and go, dude, I went to dinner with your dad. All he talked about was you. So there were people that caught it in glimpses, but for all that is said, there, life is life. So there's trauma. There was, resentment. Life was hard for me mentally because of the kayfabe, and it carried over, and it cost me friendships and relationships, and it cost me my own identity at times. It was unique to grow up and feel that pressure. It was hard sometimes, but a lot of that I put on myself. Like, at the end of the day, if you want to know what the problem is, go look in the mirror. Because since I've looked at myself and dealt with those things that I was resentful about, but recognized deep down I was really just being selfish and self-centered. Like, even as a kid where I was mad at the fans. Like, that was a selfish, self-centered. And then people go, no, you're a kid, you're allowed to do that. Well, no. There's no point in time you should be selfish and self-centered. Period. That's not self-love. That's ego. And it was only because I wanted what I wanted, and I didn't want it any other way. Versus, obviously as a young child, recognizing what was actually happening. Hey, son, these people pay for the meal we're having. I didn't have that perspective.
That's something that has to come with maturity and age, though. I think, like you said, as a kid, we sometimes find ourselves in that vulnerable spot of selfishness where we don't really get that we don't get everything we want. We just want what we want, and we don't get it. And as you age up and you get to see the things, and like you said, you realized it when your dad passed, and the outpouring of the fan support and their interest in what was happening with you really solidified, like, oh, these people actually cared about what was going on, and the real fans really stood out, and that comes with time and maturity. And I think that journey for you, while it has not been an easy one, has led you where you are. And like you said, you've built the podcast to kind of tell this story, but you've done other things recently too in your healing journey to help others and to solidify yourself moving forward and maintaining that hope and momentum. What are you doing right now? I know you said you're working with a couple of programs and you have some projects to give other people hope and to raise them out of the adversity that you've found yourself in and raised yourself out of. What else are you working on right now that's helping to uplift others?
So just a little backstory on that. After Dad passed, that was without question the most difficult thing. I had lost my marriage first, and then he passed. That was the most difficult thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like it was such a bad level of depression that I can't. Let me say this. I will say I said these words out loud to somebody. I don't want to die, but this isn't living. I'm not living, and I don't know how to anymore.
No, I completely understand that. Dude, I found myself in a divorce 11 months ago, and then my mom passed away in August. So that is entirely the perspective. It isn't, I don't want to die, but this is definitely not living. This is a place that isn't what life is supposed to be like. How do I find myself out of this hole? And I think you're doing stuff right now that is helping others find that path out too.
For sure. So move forward. I've had medical problems since I was the kid, right? Mm-hmm. It started when I was 9. It was habitual. It would happen every few years. Now, as I got older, it was more bearable, I think, because I was a little bit older. But about every 5 years, I was
maybe just used to it.
Yeah. Well, no, I would end up missing school or missing work for 2 or 3 weeks. But while it kind of healed up, but just severe chronic pain, like unbearable. Can't walk, can't get out of bed. Like truly. Pain so bad that it was like I remember saying to you, like I can't live like this. You got to do something, and they had tried multiple different things. So I had my arm break 10 years ago and lost the use of my arm for a while, and then I had a back surgery, and so my legs quit working and functioning about 2 years ago. I didn't understand what was happening, but I started having problems like my leg. I would try to go hit the brake while I was driving, and my leg wouldn't move. And so I had a spinal fusion a little over a year ago. And so when that happened, I was alone by myself in my apartment every day, all day. Well, I had my dog, Eleanor. But even taking her out to walk was like impossible, and so I had no choice but to deal with my mental health, and the things I had done in the past and the way I was dealing with it, the medications I was using and prescribed, how it was affecting my mental state, all of it legal. Nothing. I'm not breaking the law or nothing, and I'm not doing it outside of what the doctors recommended. At all. In fact, I was only on opiates for a very short period of time, but it mentally broke me when I realized that like I'm gonna be like this the rest of my life. Like I may not like it. There's days, and I've had a good 3 days, but about a week ago I did not move for 3 days straight. Like I would. To the point that, I'm asking the neighbor to walk the dog because it's just too painful. I'm using a walking cane. So even now, my legs are completely numb. That being said, I have been honored that, my struggle with mental health, I abused alcohol for most of my 20s, if not all of it. I remember I took 2 weeks off and I was like, man, I feel great. I think I've just been hungover this entire time. But I had started in my, 19, 20 years old. And man, when I got to drink, it was like that social anxiety that I had all those years of being his son was gone. Oh yeah. It was it's the best pain medication till the next day. So I had quit for several years. I even quit after Dad passed. But my health issues continued. So I would drink occasionally, but it was just my mental health and everything. So that being said, I got help. I was in and worked going to an IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program. I worked the 12 steps. I started attending AA meetings, and I wasn't drinking every day. In fact, I wasn't drinking. I could probably count how many times I drank in a year, but it was a casual thing. But the problem was why I was drinking, because I did it because I was lonely, and I did it because I was depressed, and I kind of hit that wall emotionally, and I'd be like, go to the, and
it was your
it
crutch.
was just, yeah, I would, and it would, so it wouldn't be often, when the only reason I didn't for that amount of time in between is because I felt guilty about the last time, and then eventually you forget. So I got involved and got a counselor, and I was going, went for 28 days and then I did, and then I was doing Monday through Friday, and all the while I'm also dealing with all my physical health and figuring all that out. But that allowed me the opportunity to volunteer for a nonprofit called HopeLink, where they have they help people that are struggling with mental health, addiction, or just homelessness. Which, generally speaking, homeless and the addiction and mental health, they're all married together. And so my counselor, I have a little free time at home. I can be in the bed or I can be in a chair. It doesn't matter if I can't move. And it's only, generally speaking, I don't want to exaggerate it like I'm doing a 50-hour or 40-hour work week. I'm not. Some days it's 7 minutes and it's just a phone call. But I'm fortunate that myself and my counselor is the kind of oversees it. But I take the phone call from the people that are struggling with any of those issues, and we are partnered with a bunch of sober living and mental health and addiction facilities in Georgia, around 32, and then another 8. So people call in. I'm having that conversation and trying to offer hope. And at that point, we so there's the way it works out is David makes the decision, and then we have a founder. Her name's Karen. She cuts the check, but we help them connect with another broker that is also in this field to help them get insurance in a lot of cases for free. And then, we had a situation even recently, and I won't, break any rules here, but, somebody was homeless. Like, they were going to AA meetings or NA meetings at a clubhouse, and they called in, and they didn't complain about being homeless. They'd been sober for like a month. They complained about being around people that were using, and they didn't want to use anymore. So, honestly, within a couple hours, we had them in a house. And when I say facility, there's no those white padded rooms and jackets. That's the 80s. Like, you saw that in a movie. Nowadays, it's it's a home. It's somebody's home that they built in multiple rooms in, and there's a way for them to get jobs, and there's financial support. So we help find those places for them. I just take the call, kind of understand what's going on in their situation. Then I just send it, an email to David, and I'm able to tell him, hey, these people are, they're outside of the places they want to go. We're not partnered with, or I'm saying, hey man, like this is urgent. I need you to call this person back. So it's called hopelink.org, and it's 100% nonprofit. Myself, David, we don't get any money from that. Like in a given week, it might be 3 hours of phone calls, but they're very emotional. They're very intense. And I may be the only person that reaches out or reaches back or responds to their request, because there's a form they complete. So it's something that has humbled me. It helps me understand the impact of some of the decisions I made when I was drinking, the impact that had on other people. I now get to see both sides of it. There's zero judgment or shame on my side, because I'm very open that it may be a different version of recovery, because I've got the physical, I've got the mental health, and the addiction was not, it wasn't anything that was outside of the law, and it wasn't as prevalent as it, in a lot of these cases. So I don't have this crazy story, but mine is much more the physical and the mental. But we have the opportunity to help these folks get into homes. We reach out to different people across the state of Georgia, and we're starting to connect with different people for donations, because 100% of the money goes to get somebody placed in a facility that we're partnered with. So I'm honored to be a part of it. I'm honored to serve on it. I really don't have to put a lot of time into it. Not that I don't want to. It's just I'm limited. Some days I don't have the capacity, so I have to be aware of that. But yeah, hopelink.org, and I'm just trying to. I said this recently. I'm trying to give patience to those that I expected patience from, and I'm trying to give hope to those that have none. And that's, I may be the only phone call they get that says, you can do this. You got this. Don't worry. We're going to get you here. Are you going to a meeting? Do you need to call the suicide assistance line? Do we need to call 1013? I remember when I was going through my mental health issues after coming off the pain meds in 2014, I went in my doctor and he gave me some medicine, and it was like the first time I had slept in like 3 months, like really slept, and not an alcohol-induced sleep. And I remember I came back 2 months later, and I said, Doc, I just want to tell you thank you. Like, I've gone to other doctors and mentioned these things, and they weren't really willing to help. And he said this to me, and it always said to me, he said, Travis, I may be the only person they ever tell. If I don't take care of you, maybe nobody ever will. And that's how I approach these conversations.
Let me say this.
A lot of times.
Hang on, John. It's that phone call, right? Like you never know. You talk, you say, you don't do, 40 hours a week by any means, but it's not a situation that you have to, right? Like that phone call that comes in, or that phone call that you have to make, that could be the difference maker for somebody else on the other end of that line, right? Let's be fair. I think that the amount of positivity that you're trying to push out into the universe is something that should be commended. I think that your perception on where you are now, like it's truly just sitting here and listening to your story, like it's inspiring. There are elements behind it that, everybody's story is different. Like nobody lives the same and reads the same pages. Everybody's stuff's different. The perseverance and the adversity and making that change, knowing that this needs to happen, and being that positive influence for whoever John or Jane Doe is that's calling you on that line. Like it's good to hear. And truthfully, like I don't know what else to say about it. I'm just it's touching. Like it's good shit. John, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. A lot of times when we do these shows and we're talking to talent that's inside the ring, I ask them about, how can the future of the industry become better? And this isn't what our conversation has been about, but I do have a question about the future of something. We all know that the healthcare system in our country here in the States is not great. We all know that it's underfunded and undervalued. How do you think, being from someone who needed the healthcare system to someone who's helping those who need the healthcare system, how can we as a collective unit in America, at least here and probably all over the place, how can we address this lack of help? The fact that one person may be the only phone call that someone gets and it might not come. How can we fix that problem as a collective group? Maybe we don't get government funding for it, or maybe we don't, have a corporation behind it, but how can we as people figure out a way to reach out and make that difference that you've tried to make? And how can we make this a full unified front against mental health afflictions and addiction?
So let me give. I'm all about statistics, and I'm all about watching what doctors have to say. Peer-reviewed doctors. Dr. Anna Lemke talks about dopamine. Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's a neurologist out of Stanford, and he does a podcast. And Dr. Peter Attia talks about longevity. So, in fact, I think Dr. Andrew Huberman had one on alcohol in particular. And what people don't know about alcohol, like chronic drinkers, like 1 to 2 drinks a day, whether it be 1 a day or 7 on the weekend, that's considered a chronic drinker. That's not how we look at it. That's not, but alcohol literally destroys all the microbiome in your stomach. So that, all the intestinal issues, like you're doing it to, it's poison. Like, in fact, I'll give you a funny one is, non-alcoholic beer, you have to be 21 or older to buy, but it's less than 0.5% of alcohol. mouthwash can be 14 to 27% alcohol, and anybody breathing can buy it. So the thing that is missing, and I'm going to give some context. In 1950, it wasn't uncommon for people to be lobotomized for their anxiety. That was, their panic. Like it was, you see even in the 80s, people would be on Thorazine, and they're dripping out of their mouth. So medicine has come a long way, right? Long way, especially for mental health. The baseline anxiety for kids today, and I say kids, I shouldn't say kids and young adults, is the same anxiety they would have lobotomized you for in the 50s. So the first step is anxiety, depression, addiction. The reason they go hand in hand is because somebody that's depressed and struggling with life, they take a pill, or drink something, and they go, oh my God, that just turned off my depression. Now it starts there, because if every drug killed you, like, nobody would ever do them. They do them because it's fun. So it gives you an experience that you've never been able to master in life. And alcohol is not the problem. Drugs are not the problem. Those are the solution to the depression. That was your solution for your problem. And we as a country, and stats are my thing. The last time I looked, and so please understand this is just from, these are things I see from Harvard and, that have been vetted. In the early 80s, 17.8% of the country was considered 17.8% of the country was considered overweight. Now, I lost 50 pounds before my spinal fusion because they said I wasn't going to walk again. I was highly motivated. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I had the surgery, I was supposed to be out of it for 4 hours, and I had fasted, and I was ready for this fusion. And I woke up 45 minutes after the fusion, and I leaned up. I'm like, I need to go to the bathroom. And the lady looks at me with this ghost white face, and I was like, she's like, I got to ask the doctor. I'm like, I don't need a doctor to know I need to go to the bathroom. What's the problem?
We're about to have a problem.
I'm like, yeah, what's going on here? And the doctor comes in. He's like, dude, you're not Wolverine. I'm like, I just got to go pee. And so I went to the bathroom, and I'm like, hey, I need to walk the halls. They were like, what? Like, everybody's just doing this. Like, why is he doing this? And I get done, and they finally sit me down, like, we've never had anybody wake up within this amount of time. Like, nobody's ever woken up within 3 hours. And you woke up and are walking out of here in an hour and 15 minutes after a spinal fusion. And those Orndorff genes, maybe some of them did pass, but I looked at him and I said, Doc, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm 7% body fat. Like, my physical health, everything I did led to this moment, because the reality was everybody else having the spinal fusion, and I'm just as guilty because of the weight they were carrying. And I'm like, you have no other patients that are single digit body fat. And that wasn't me bragging. That was I planned for this.
You knew that you were going into it with that impression, and you knew exactly what was going to help you walk out of there.
He literally said I wouldn't walk if I had the weight. I was scared to death. I still struggle with walking, but I can walk. I may be I can't go running on a treadmill. I'm not going to go walking on a treadmill, but I can walk my dog. I can get around to the car. I can bring a walking cane. There's times that I've gone places where I've had to stand too long and I have a walker, but I live, right? So I was scared to death. And, you move forward to now in the U.S., 78.8% of the country is overweight. So whether people want to believe it or not, and I'm not shaming anybody. I absolutely blame the government. Subsidizes 68% of the corn in this country, which is what the majority of processed food is made from, which is in the middle of our aisles. If they would, subsidize, which is, by the way, a ton of money, if they would subsidize the farmers and the chicken and the eggs and the broccoli and all the other things, chicken would cost $1.
Yeah, explain to me why a cheeseburger is $2 and a salad is $10, and make it make sense.
Right.
Explain it to me.
Because the government subsidizes that stuff, and so there's money in addiction, and whether it's in processed foods are. We're introduced to that time. It's not a coincidence. We're now in a time in history where nobody has to go without a meal. We have enough food for everybody, even if it's junk food. So where I go with all that is that tells me, because the way we eat, that's a reflection somewhat of on our own mental health condition. The amount of alcohol, like being overweight is not a moral issue. You're not a bad human being. Being an alcoholic has been recognized as a medical condition since 1952. You now can buy Narcan, which if anybody's ever seen Pulp Fiction, that's what they took the needle and shoved it into Emma's heart. Mm-hmm. Can't remember her last name, but they shoved it into her heart to get her because she overdosed on the heroin. You can now buy that at Publix, CVS, over the counter, and it's a nose spray. And there are drugs, xylazine, xanazine, which is 50 times stronger than fentanyl. Fentanyl, I've seen people coming off that and go through the withdrawals. Like the drugs that were around in the 80s are not what we know today. There's people overdosing on a daily basis, and people are just taking one pill, and it kills them. So we are so caught up, and we'll even use wrestling as we are so caught up and self-absorbed in this country that the only thing that's going to fix it is when we become servants of each other. Because places like where I'm at the nonprofit, I just to tell you, I'm on my 4th day of fasting. I haven't eaten in 4 days, and my plan is to go 7. But my plan is to take the money I would have spent and donate it because it was already in my budget. And that's not to bring attention to me. That's just after what I've gone through and the amount of help I got, it changed my life. Like when I tell you I am proud of myself, that's something I could have never said at any point in my life. And it's not because of these things I do. It's because of how I've become a servant. And I became a Christian and believe that, and this is just my personal thing. I'm not putting it on anybody. I'm not here to preach. I became a Christian, believed that Jesus died on the cross for my sins when I was 18. And I get people, it's hard to believe God, but it's hard not to believe that Jesus existed. So, I get that people are like, well, I don't see it. I'm like, there's a lot of historical evidence. So for me, that's how I came to my truth. I was 45 when I surrendered. And people do that in a different way inside of the AA world. They reference it as a higher power. For me, that's Jesus Christ. That's where I go. But other people, it's a higher power, and I respect and I love them for it. But having gone through the mental, and then actually having this spiritual awakening where I'm aware of God's presence more than I ever had. And so those times as I was Mr. Wonderful Son walking into the room, now I walk into a room as a servant and I can see things and things happen to me. I trip over miracles. Like the other day I'm in the Whole Foods right next door. I get in line. I said something about the patients because there was a woman behind me clearly going to work, buying one thing. I let her go in front of me and I was like, I'm not in a rush and I can see you need to go and I've got like 30 things and I'm going to be slow because I got to get my Amazon phone out and do the in-store code. I'm like, I only come here once a week because it wears me out. Like, go ahead. The cashier was so sweet and she just smiled and she kind of got choked up and she goes, I needed that. I'm like, what just happened? That wasn't profound. And
it
she
was
goes,
to her because you were restoring her faith in other people.
So she goes, I needed that kindness. I have cancer. And I was like, oh. And I'm in, like, and at that moment, like everything of all those times I got impatient or, was honking at a red light. I was like, the brevity of hearing that. And my dad got cancer and I cried my eyes out. The brevity of where I've come and how my heart is so open. In that moment, I was like, I just looked at her. I said, can I pray for you? And she's like, yes. And I came home and I just, again, rarely do I do this, but I'm like, and I don't do long anything if it's on social media. I was like, hey, this is what happened today. I am humbled. I'm embarrassed of my previous behavior and some of the selfishness and self-centered things that I've done, multiple times throughout my life. People that I've hurt with my words because I didn't understand the power other than I wanted control, and I knew how to use my words in a way I could control them. All that sat on me in that moment, and I just said, please pray for Tanya. A month later, I go into the Whole Foods. The entire store's empty except for her line. I go up and get in line. She's got somebody there. And she kind of looks at me like, why are you waiting? Like, that line's up. And the lady comes over. I was like, no, I'm good. I'll wait. So I get up there and I go, hey, Tanya. And by the way, I'm not taking any credit for this. I said, hey, Tanya, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. How's the cancer? How's the treatment? She started to choke up. This is what happened at the register. She didn't need chemo or radiation. They don't know why, but all she has to do is take this pill. And this miracle happened right in front of me. And she goes, can I hug you? And I said, yes, absolutely. Because at that point I'm crying and I want to hide my face a little bit. And I come around the counter, and as I look around, all of a sudden, this empty Whole Foods is packed. And there's these two people hugging at a register from completely different backgrounds. The two of us don't fit together on paper. And you could tell in that moment, people went, what just happened? Whatever it was special. And Tanya told that story over and over to the people that checked out, that got it, because they got in line to wonder what, she told me later, because every time I see her now, we come up and hug each other. But so that's not because of how good of a person I am. It's because I've learned how selfish I was. I worked on those resentments. I took responsibility for things that I blamed other people for, because it was me. Like, at the end of the day, had I handled it better, they would have been different. So does that mean everything in life's my fault? No, they got to do the same thing I did and recognize their behavior could have been different. Like, it's it's equal. But at the end of the day, whether it's a discipleship, a sponsorship, a mentorship, find somebody that is freaking happy and is killing it in life, that has peace and joy and contentment. And it doesn't always come in a suit. Like the guy that is my sponsor looks like a professional wrestler, by the way. And the irony is, he says, I act like one. But he's this big, burly, muscular dude that Eleanor, stop. That we've got on our knees and prayed together. He's like a mountain of a man. And every time we talk, he talks about love and being connected and tolerance. And, my heart was willing. And I said, I'm not capable of doing this. Like, I've tried it my way forever. Somebody's got to do something different. And I came to the point, whatever you believe that God could do for me, what I could not do for myself. Whatever God that is, for me, I know who it is. For you, it may be different. But until we get to a point in this country that we quit pointing the finger, we quit worrying about what president's in office, because it really has no relevance whatsoever in reality. We think it does. We put a lot of weight into it, but and even how we present who we are voting for is about us. It's not even about the person we're voting for. It's about our ego and pride of, this is what I represent. There's places like what I do all over the country. There are people all over this country. There was a guy, I can't remember, his name's Wes, and he's in Texas. I think it's called Clean Water. He started selling water. So he's raised $2 million to help people get into treatment. Like, the insurance, I deal with a company, they have a facility called the ROCC, ROCC, and Hope Dealers Worldwide. They, if you're in, certain states, they are a broker, and all the fees they get for being a broker, they donate it to the ROCC, because that woman had a situation where one of her children died. So this community is in your backyard. And by the way, a lot of these drugs you can now buy at a gas station. So this fentanyl overdose and all the things that are coming with it, it is hitting every family. And so the epidemic of addiction is directly related, in my opinion, to the level of self-absorption and self-pity, and the lack of men and women now that are willing to take somebody under their wing and go, call me every day and check in with me and tell me what's going through your head. Were you resentful today? Did you treat somebody wrong? Did you, going back to just the simple morality of, I love humanity. Because when you do that, I've seen it happen so many times. When people finally surrender their will and understand how they're responsible for all this stuff, they find peace, and then they give peace. But most of us aren't willing to do the work, and myself included. It took me a long time. If you had told me I would go to AA, I would have told you you're crazy. I thought it was a cult. I was like, because that meant I couldn't quit alcohol myself. But when I got there, I found out it was a spiritual experience, because we're spiritual beings living a human life, right? Like, your consciousness, your thought, it's all from your spirit. So when I go in there and I'm seeing lives that are completely different, and that may not be the right place for you, but they have Pornography Anonymous, which, again, when you're doing that, those women are getting, some of them are doing it for money, some of them are trafficked. So you got to connect with the humanity of what you're doing and go, oh, wait a second. Alcohol, it's a poison. There's no psychological or physical benefit to it. I'm not telling you to not drink. That's your decision. But is it hindering you from being the person you could be in this life? And I can go down the list. Like, working out is great. Do I think people should work out and try to look like my dad? That was his obsession, and part of the reason he wouldn't get the surgery he needed, because he didn't want a scar. So that pride negatively affected him later in life because he couldn't use his right arm. So while it gave him a life, he also figured out, maybe because later in life he would go to the gym, but his workout routine he even gave to me in my 30s was completely different than what he told me in my 20s, when finally it clicked, like, oh, this is unnecessary. So for me, in order for the world to really change, every single one of us has to look at ourselves, look at our identity, look at our self-esteem, our pride, all these things, our fears, and say, is this motivating me, and has this motivated me? Who am I resentful towards? Because that bitterness destroys the vessel it's stored in more than who it's poured on. And so in order for, the issue isn't medical care. The issue is we don't eat right, and we don't do the things we should do physically, and we have jobs we're miserable in, and we go down the list of things. Like, if I've seen people really happy or be begging for what you have, and you don't even appreciate it. But I wake up every morning and I do a meditation, and this is things I didn't do before. So just let me be clear. I do a meditation. I get on my knees and I pray. I come out and I write 10 things I'm grateful for, and that's how I begin. And I have my coffee. Like, it's a practice to do this, and I am not perfect. Like, I've had to go to my specialist. I'm like, dude, you're not going to believe what I did. But I'm honest about it, and I'm telling somebody, and he's holding me accountable without shaming me. And so, it's not about healthcare. That's not the problem. If we were, as a society, working on ourselves, we would help other people. So what's happened to me is an extension of what I went through, because I got help. I have no other choice but to be a servant now, because that's what clicked. Now, I got great advice from somebody. I was in tears because I'll say her first name. I said, Debbie, I'm never going to be able to do the job I used to do for the bank. Like, I can't walk that long. Like, I never will. I'm like, Debbie, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't think I'll ever get to work. And she looked at me and she said, Travis, you're going to work again in some capacity. May not be full time, but you'll work again. It might not fill your wallet, but it'll fill your heart. And that's the best advice I've gotten in a long, long time. That being said, the wrestling fans of the day that are constantly complaining about different things and how they go out in the world. You can go up to a red light, and as soon as it turns green, somebody's hitting the gas or hitting the horn because you didn't immediately respond. We're sitting at the dinner table looking at our phones. I'm guilty. I've done it before too. I've just chosen to not do it anymore. I have timers on my phone, so I don't use it, but I don't really want to anyway. If I'm in the bed, that's certainly not an option. But we can fix healthcare in 6 months. There's a ton of people that do this. We're just not networked and connected. And we need people in between us to go, do you know about this person? And start working together and quit coming up with all the reasons we're different. Because when we recognize humanity as one, no matter what color, no matter what race, no matter what creed, I don't care if you're transgender, like you're a human being, none of that stuff is relevant to me. That's stuff you've got to deal with. And if you've made peace, then what does that have to do with my peace? I can genuinely say, and I say it all the time when I put in messages to my children, to my friends, and even to people on social media, I genuinely love you. I don't know you, and I love you guys. When I say I love you, there's an empathy going. I hope today I was able to be a blessing, and thank you for being a blessing to me. That's my genuine heart. That came from recognizing all the things I needed to do different and getting to a point that I was willing to go to any length to get help. And by the grace of God, I received it.
Man, you said a lot there, and all of it resonates.
I do talk a lot.
Sorry. No. It was absolutely perfect and poignant.
It was, and I really feel like that there are people who view our channel that maybe need to hear that. And maybe need to hear that we all go through stuff that can be mild to wild, and it can be dark and different. But there is always a way out. There's always somebody there who can be there for you. There's avenues to go down to get help, and ultimately, that's the message, right? I didn't know any of this about you before we had a pre-call. And as you're telling us this stuff, this is a message. This is something that I said it a minute ago. It's something that's very positive. There's negative things that happened, right? But we all have to go through that. It's I quote The Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne. I crawled through a sewer line of shit to come out cleaner on the other side. And ultimately, sometimes that's what we have to do as people. And I feel like that you've done that. And I feel like that you have turned this corner, and you have such a beacon of hope and possibility for anyone who's battling anything out there. It's a testament. I know that we didn't intend to go 2 hours today. We don't ever have anything of that nature, but this has been such a good and positive conversation that I truly feel like not only, John, you touched on it earlier. Mr. Wonderful, the character is one thing. Mr. Wonderful, the dad, and the person, and how caring and how loving he was with you, and making sure that you were important in every time that he had time to make that available time. Just the whole thing. It's really good stuff. I enjoy what you're doing over on the social media platforms by keeping the positivity out there, and really and truly, man, I really think that this other avenue with hope is it's gonna be a fulfillment that none of us will ever be able to understand, because we're not sitting in that chair and we're not taking that call from somebody who, for all intents and purposes, if you don't answer, then maybe the last one. That stuff that is real, it is deep, and it's something that I will take out of this conversation as such a huge positive reinforcement that in society there are still some good fucking people out there. John, what are you thinking?
Well, it blows me away the amount of work that you've put in, and to know where you've come from and where you're at right now, and the journey that you've been on in your healing process, and that you are opening the doors to other people to find the path to healing themselves is incredible. I want to commend you for the hope that you bring to other people, and the fact that you're willing to tell your story to be an inspiration to others. It does inspire us to also do the same thing. And I want to implore people, if you have not already done so, go down below in the comments, find the links to all of the helping programs that Travis is involved in. Find your local community help programs and become involved, even if it's just volunteering some of your time. Anything that you can do to help another member of your community will increase the value of your community and increase the helping hands among the people around you. And Travis, you are absolutely pushing society in that direction by doing the work that you do, and it is an inspiration to us. And I want to thank you for spending time with us today and helping us get this message out there and helping us show the world that there are people still out here trying to make it a better place. Because sometimes we lose in despair seeing the evil around us and everywhere we look. And sometimes it just takes that one beacon light to show us that there is still something out there bright enough to hope for.
What I would share is I'm grateful that you feel that way. I'm touched. I do this much. I do this.
But any amount is more than some people.
I'm telling you, there are people out there, like I could name, there are people that I know personally, but if you go, I didn't go through a lot of things other people went through with recovery, but, if you knew my counselor and what he went through, and he's on, like those podcasts where it's called Most High Media, and it's basically Christian Jansen's the pastor, and he's the host, and David Cleope is, is my counselor, and he's on as a guest. I had seen a podcast with Jamie Tall. I think her last name is actually Toludo, but she's a certified coach and has a podcast out of Athens, Georgia. Like, there's people that are knee deep in this stuff that sacrifice their entire lives. I'm telling you, like, even this little bit that I get the opportunity to do, like, it takes no time. I don't have to sit. I can do it in bed. Like, it's a lot of free. I got a cell phone. It's a couple calls. It's not that big a deal. I'm grateful for that. But it gets me outside of myself. Like, it's really easy to write a gratitude list the next morning when you're talking to somebody that's homeless and has been for 4 years and hasn't had a shower in 2. Like, I can write down hot water, a warm shelter, a bed, and I can get very granular very quick about all these things that I have in my life, and it makes me think about me less, and I think that's the message, is that there are so many people out there doing these things, and if we could get everybody to say, hey, I'll give an hour a week of volunteer time, I'll search this out, whatever I need to do. Heck, text, email me on Facebook. I'll find somebody. I don't have all the answers by any stretch. I'm still in this journey, just like everybody else. This is one day at a time, bro. Mm-hmm. It is like, if I don't wake up and hit my knees in prayer and I bring out my prayer journal, if I don't do that, my day is hosed. Like, I am a completely different human being. People have told me that in the past, and I've heard about praying on your knees, and I'm like, yeah, I can do the same thing standing up. I don't know what it is, but it is a difference maker every day about where my heart and my head and my words are. And at night, I do my meditation, and I think about, did I say anything that was offensive? And I remember what happened the other day. I was talking to my counselor. I was like, hey, man, I want to apologize to you. The things I said yesterday, I was irritable. He said, like, you didn't say anything wrong. And I'm like, yeah, but I was irritable when I said them. So I would have said them different if I was in a different state of mind. And I need to tell you that that's not what I want to be. And that's where I take responsibility for my motivations, mm-hmm. right? And so I've had great mentors. David is, a guru to me. He's a brother. He's a friend. He's a sponsor. He's a mentor. I can go down. He's been so much to me and my family. And if nobody listens to this podcast, but you two guys were blessed, that I was here for a reason, and that's all that matters to me.
Well said. Well said. Well, I am really grateful for your time. I think that our fans of our channel are really going to enjoy this. I really appreciate how open and honest you are as a person with the story that you have.
It took a long time, just for the record. So if you're under the age of 45, you're ahead of me.
Hey, listen.
Sometimes our journeys are a long one, man.
I tell people,
what it is.
That you got to, people get really mad when somebody doesn't, you go to try to give them help and they didn't get fixed. You don't know what their road is. Accept them for where they're at. Again, it's not a morality issue. Your brain creates new networks of synapses. And so you have to undo those wires. And if you come off drugs, alcohol, anything that you've done, it takes 14 months for your brain and your body to start producing dopamine naturally. That's why people can't stay on a diet for 2 weeks. They're no longer getting dopamine from the sugar they're eating, and they get depressed. And the worst you ever feel after an addiction is at 28 days, right when you get out of rehab. That's the lowest point because your dopamine's so low. 1 out of 10 people dealing with mental health or addiction will reach out for help. 1 out of 20 that go to a 28-day rehab won't relapse. 1 out of 3 won't relapse if they go to aftercare. Now, what we don't know is which one had to go 12 times, because I've seen it. I've seen people going 12 times, and they are changing lives every day. That was their road. So, if people are walking over you, my suggestion is, are you performing for them and you're giving of yourself things you shouldn't give up because you have some need for somebody to tell you you're a good person or doing a good job? Like, do you need that to feel good about yourself? Because it's amazing what has happened to me when in this journey, it grows and gets better every day. Doesn't mean I don't have my setbacks or struggles. My physical health is unbearable. I'm dying right now. Just to be honest, I didn't take my medication at 2 like I should have. And I'll pay for it. It'll be, look, I'm used to it. I have a high threshold of pain since I'm ADHD. So like, the number of people that are going through withdrawals, when they start a diet or all these, like, it's something you've got to be able to work through. And that's why counseling, support, mentorship, like have an accountability partner, but that vulnerability of being open and able to forgive yourself and not need somebody to approve of you. When you just wake up and go, I'm going to walk in every room and I'm going to figure out how I can serve all these people. And one of the things I had to learn is sometimes, Travis, don't say a word. And I've actually, for the first time in my life, can go into those rooms and not say anything. And my sponsor, like, one day goes, dude, you've got a silver tongue. Just be careful with it in these settings because it's easy to sound like a preacher. And you can, the problem is you can do it. He's like, every time I'm around you, I'm motivated. I don't know why you're not a motivational speaker. And he's like, I don't even know what I'm motivated to do, but I'm motivated to do something. He's like,
do something.
Give me. Yeah. And so, like, he gets inspired, and my sponsor is actually going to be donating to Hope Link because he's like, dude, if that's what y'all do, that's amazing. So he's like, you have this gift, and make no mistake, I now know people follow me because of my dad. That's just a mission field that by living a certain way, people might say, I want what he has. Because when I walked into that room and I met my sponsor, I went, I want what he has. And I said, I'll quit doing what I think I should do and start listening to him until it doesn't work. So thank you so much for having me on. Like, it's been a blessing. I never intend this to happen, but I'll just be honest with you. It seems to be happening a lot lately. Each podcast has gone longer or it gets cut and then we end up talking for an hour and a half. So if y'all have to edit any of this out because of my long-windedness, I would completely understand.
This is entirely a great show for us. This is a great visit with you, and we're so glad that we've got to share this with you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a blessing.
We really do appreciate it. John, why don't you go ahead and take us home, and let's get out of here for the day.
Well, guys and gals out there in Chatland, you know exactly what's coming. If you don't, drop those savage elbows right there on the ring bell so you know everything we've got going on behind the curtain. Never miss a beat with what we've got coming up. We've always got new shows here on the channel all the time. We've got new things we've got planned. We've got new stuff coming out. We've got new people to reach out to, and opportunities galore coming at this channel every single week here. If you guys have not done so already, get over with our Discord, get behind the curtain with us, check us out on YouTube and Twitch. Follow more shows just like this. Get in-depth interviews with indie stars and amazing motivational speakers like we've had on today. It has been a pleasure. We love each and every one of your faces, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, we'll see you then.